Welcome to the Elemental Awakening. Okay, welcome everyone. Gio here from Elemental Awakening Podcast. Today I have a special guest. His name is Joe Dolce. He is an author, entrepreneur, educator, many other things in the realm of plants and cannabis that he's going to tell us all about. So I just wanted to warm welcome to the show. Joe, welcome.
Hi, Gio.
Yeah, so it's great to meet you. And before we get started, just give us a little background on who you are and what sort of led you to do the things you're doing now. I know you're traveling around the world talking about cannabis and all these cool things. So
God,
what's
who
the
am I?
backstory?
Who am I? That's a really big question. I think I ask myself that every day, and I get a new answer. Um, I had a long period of using cannabis when I was younger, in my 20s and 30s, and then I stopped. And back when I'm in my later 40s, I sort of reignited my interest in this plant, but something new came upon at me, which is that I just didn't know anything about it. This was before legalization. This was before, the current wave we're riding. So I thought I really should talk about it, learn about it, and then try to explain to the millions and millions and millions of people I knew who used it why they liked it so much, like what it gave them, how it worked in the body, how it worked in the brain. We all know that, it can make you feel well, can help you sleep, can sometimes make you happy, other times make you very sad. But I never understood why. So I was lucky. I got Harper Wave, which is a division of HarperCollins, one of the 5 big publishing companies in the world, to pay me to go around the world to learn about the plant. And there's, in this book I wrote called Brave New Weed, there's a much longer narrative story as to how I got from New York to Amsterdam to Colorado to the makers of oils and things in California, and ultimately into the labs of Jerusalem, where the world's best scientists have been studying this plant for over 60 years, really. I didn't know any of this stuff before I started this journey. So I sort of thought, well, maybe it's time to take what I've learned and try to bring it into the mainstream. So that's sort of what I've been trying to do since writing that book.
Awesome.
How's that?
And that was great. Yeah. And was there one thing that surprised you the most of everything that you sort of learned? Was there like an aha moment, like, holy crap, like there's something here that.
Oh God, so many. I mean, there's an endocannabinoid system in the body that, is the biggest receptor system in the human body. B, what's a receptor system? I didn't even know about how neurons connect and transmit information throughout the body, right? I did not know the insane history of racism that underpinned prohibition from the 1930s and really up until today, right? I didn't know how the U.S. criminal justice system targets basically men of color to their own profit, by the way, by imprisoning them and keeping them in jail. So I think what was really and finally, one of many things, I never realized how many areas of the world cannabis touched: politics, law, criminal justice, sociology, psychology, physical well-being, wellness. I could go on and on and on. So I think there were a gazillion aha moments that I've tried to encapsulate into that book and beyond.
No,
I
I
keep
love
learning.
this.
I keep learning more stuff. So it seems to be never ending.
Yeah. And so I guess in the US now, they were at a pivotal point where they're talking about like full stream decriminalization. Is that what's happening at a federal level, or what's the current state? I know in Canada we legalize for recreation across the country, but we still haven't, I think, expunged any of the criminal records for all those things.
You haven't.
So just,
I think you're on your way to doing it. But from what I understand from my Canadian counterparts, system has a long way to go in Canada, and the fact that it's so much more expensive to buy in the legal market than the illegal market is an enormous problem. So in the United States, there's currently, I believe, 15 states now that are legal for recreation. New York just went legal, which is a major, major, major big deal, right? Capital of finance, capital of media in the country. So that is going to change things significantly in terms of law and policy. I mean, we're still waiting for the federal government to get off its ass and say, okay, we can bank. Would you believe I run a medical cannabis education company? All I do is words, pictures, and videos. I cannot get Stripe or Square or any of the online payment processors to work with us.
It's insane.
Cannot, because the word cannabis is in the title. It's medical cannabis mentor. I keep saying, but it's words and pictures. They won't have it. So that's one insane fact. Really, without federal legalization, I think we should just go for legalization. Decriminalization is not enough. It's got to be legalization. Interstate commerce is still screwed up. There's all sorts of crazy, stupid laws that allow one state to do this and another state to do that. They can still arrest people. Without federal legalization, they can still take children away from parents in many states. So we've got a mess. We've got a lot of messes. This is yet another one, but it does look that at the same time there's a huge mess, there's this incredible highway being built towards this enormous industry that we're all sort of waiting to take hold.
Yeah, and it seems like most of the world has followed the U.S. footsteps. To start the war on drugs and even going backwards. Into prohibition. How long do you think it'll take to detangle that or reverse that once the U.S. gets its act together and says, "Hey, like this plant is not harmful. It's not addictive. It's not, shouldn't be illegal for any reasons." Maybe, what do you think the rest of the world's going to follow? Like,
I'm not sure the U.S. government's ever going to take that line, but it's going to take 1 second if they would undo something called the Single Convention Treaty. Okay, this was a treaty started by the Nixon administration in the 70s, which basically cajoled and paid other companies to sign on to it, saying we were all going to legislate and hold illegal people who use cannabis and distribute cannabis and import or export cannabis. And if you agree with us, we're going to give you subsidies. And if you disagree with us, we're going to make your life hell. Okay. So as a result, many, many countries signed on to it. And that was why the legalization in Uruguay was so significant, because it was the first country to break that treaty. Canada was the second, okay? And now it has created a momentum that other countries can say, okay, bye-bye treaty, we can do as we see fit. I mean, Israel's talking about exporting into Europe, and this is happening now one by one. So that would be a major legal hurdle to undo, all right? And then I think, look, for better or worse, we live in a capitalist society. The minute other countries wake up to the fact that there are gazillions of dollars to be made in lots of different ways here. I mean, cannabis is the only boom business coming out of America right now. It's the only boom business coming out of North America right now, right? And we're sitting on it. We're not letting it explode. So I think the minute that goes, everything changes.
interesting. Okay, so so there's this old sort of idea that cannabis is the gateway drug. I know you have some of your own opinions and thoughts on that. So what are your feelings towards that idea of a gateway drug, and is it real? And I think that's what a lot of people fear about, with recreational use and kids seeing it more being used, and then everyone's got this fear they're going to turn into crack or heroin addicts because they smoke some marijuana. Is
Right.
there any proof?
It's
Yeah,
like
like what?
everyone who drinks wine is going to become an alcoholic. I mean,
Right.
there's just no evidence of this. I mean, people have been using cannabis for ever since history has been recorded, and there's never been any outbreaks of insanity or massive addiction. What there is, however, though, is there's a lessening of belief in the propaganda that all drugs are bad for you and are going to harm you. I personally am for the legalization of all drugs. I think criminalizing what you put into your body is a cardinal sin. I think it's insane. I think it makes no sense whatsoever. And I think it really just keeps the police from really doing their job, which is what they should be doing. Stopping crime. Making this sort of thing a crime is, to me, insane. Furthermore, I happen to believe that cannabis is a gateway drug, but I think it's a gateway drug to health, because I think the more we understand its applications to wellness and certain medical conditions, the more we see that, It helps with sleep. It helps with anxiety. It helps with pain. And you know what? It makes you laugh. And most psychiatrists and psychologists I know think laughter is a really good medicine.
Hmm.
So I think it is true that it is a gateway drug, and I do think it. I mean, frankly, I do think it opens you up to the possibility of using other substances that might also bring you joy, happiness, awareness, um, a new establishment with nature, and maybe new thinking. Hey, how about some new thinking? How about that? Watney?
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like you're making an indirect reference like psychedelic medicines. Is that what
Yes,
you're referring to?
yes,
Yeah.
certainly.
So I made a documentary about psychedelics a couple years back. It's on Gaia. I released it on YouTube for free. It got a few 100,000 views.
What was it called?
Psyched out, psyched
Okay.
out. It was just I had an experience with ayahuasca back in 2013. Went down south and came back and felt like I needed to tell the world about it. And back then, not many people were really open to psychedelics
Right.
as a tool for anything other than it was drugs. But I was pretty good at presenting my case, and now there's a lot of other people presenting cases in a really interesting way, for therapy, for opening your mind, for changing things. And the support was amazing, and now you see there's whole industries that are being built around it because they
Yeah.
see like, hey,
Yeah.
like, we're getting to the root of what the problem is here. And I'm a huge proponent for all plant medicines, or any medicine that can free you from the shackles of your mind, or to help liberate your physical body from who knows what. And I think the current Western system, again, is all the allopathic ways of putting a band-aid on something, taking away a symptom. But I think the plants go a little bit deeper, and they have something that really addresses things at more of a root level. And which is why I wanted to ask you a bit more about the endocannabinoid system in the body. So um, is that just for cannabis type product substances? Like, what does it actually do? And if we've evolved to have this, was it something that we've always had a relationship with cannabis to have these endocannabinoids, or is it something we just share in common? Like, what did your research show you around
Oh,
the relationship?
these are great questions. Thank you for asking. Well, so the endocannabinoid system was discovered in the 1980s. That's how long it has taken to find it, really. And what it is it's a system for maintaining balance between the internal world and the external world. So it's a really new system. Talk about new ways of thinking, right? Like, by the way, this system is not taught in medical school. Okay. Very few medical doctors know about it. Most of them don't believe it exists when you start talking to them about it. Okay.
Okay.
And there's a reason for that. Probably that, medical students are already overwhelmed with information, and if things are illegal, why teach it? Although that's about to suddenly change, right? But it's this very interesting system that maintains balance. It tells the body when things are off. Uh, so it sends messages to the brain and from the brain out. Okay. Endocannabinoids so far have only been found to interact with external substances found in cannabis. Okay. We don't know if other substances work with them. We think others do. But it's, again, the research here is so limited because, again, the federal prohibition by the US government really limits research into the healthful benefits of cannabis. All right. That is true, by the way, ever since 1971. So we're still learning about it, and what other substances interact with it. We know it has something to do with the GABA receptor system, which controls your fight or flight mechanisms, responses. So you can understand how it can calm you down, how taking CBD interacts with GABA, and how when you get more CBD, the system works to calm you down a little bit more.
Yeah,
Certain,
can you explain a little bit more in detail the difference between like THC and CBD,
oh,
and
sure.
how that works? Yeah, because a lot of people ask me all the time about like,
Oh,
what should I take? What's better? Like, what do they
sure.
do? Yeah.
So the answer is your body is going to tell you what to take because every body is quite different. And again, because we don't understand the endocannabinoid system that well, all we understand is its tone. That's how we speak about it. Like, what's the tone of the system? So CBD and THC are two of about 160 compounds that make up the cannabis plant. They're the most predominant. THC is the more psychoactive one, the one that gives you feelings of euphoria or can bring you down. Uh, it's that one. CBD is much less psychoactive. There's not a whole lot it does, but it does have an effect on the calming of the body at certain doses. THC is the more medical compound, primarily because it's been studied more. That's what we know. Okay, so we know that THC really can reduce pain. They both can. Okay, but that THC taken in high doses can create stress and anxiety. Okay, that's quite interesting, right? Like why some people get freaked out when they if they're not cannabis users, right? They can suddenly have a lot of anxiety because it's this big influx of THC. Um, THC can give you the munchies, and simultaneously at a different dose, it can suppress the appetite. So it's very interesting. These compounds are very dose dependent and have different effects, right? Which is why people who use cannabis know how to use them to get what they want mostly. And people who are more called cannabis naive can often have, not a bad experience, but an underwhelming experience or an uncomfortable experience in the beginning.
Well, yeah, I think there's a
Make
big difference.
sense?
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between an underwhelming versus a bad experience. I know some people have like very bad experiences just from cannabis where they think that the police are after them, or the world is going to
Paranoia.
end, this extreme paranoia or fear or sadness, like
Yeah.
negative emotions. I'm curious what your perspective is on what is there a purpose to that? Is it psychologically trying to bring things to the surface that they need to address? And you said like certain people that understand it can sort of know how to dose dependent properly
Yeah.
to avoid or interact with that. So what are your thoughts on?
Well, having been somebody who's eaten way too much cannabis and had some really uncomfortable experiences, I'm not really sure that it's surfacing my internal paranoia. I mean, if you ever eat too much cannabis,
Yeah,
you ever have a really bad time on it?
I've had an experience that felt like I was having a psychedelic
Well,
experience,
I've had that
where
too, which I
yeah,
love. I mean, those are the great
it,
experiences.
it, it was a paranoia. It was a negative cycle. So there's visions, like stress, closing my eyes, just like, yeah, it was just too much. It
Yeah,
was.
sometimes it's just all too much. So it unleashes like something in the brain. Like I always think it somehow is working on all these neural pathways in the brain, right? And sometimes it's just too much thinking. It's just too
Mhm.
much coming at you. Sound is too loud and too much stimulation. So try to avoid that. That's why I like knowing about cannabis. I like knowing how to dose it. So I know how many milligrams in an edible my body wants. It wants between 5 and 10 for a nice experience, right? 25 may not be so nice for me, but I know other people who take hundreds of milligrams of THC at one time and have a great experience. So it's really dependent on the body, and that's also because we build a tolerance depending on how much we use, right? So right now, like I'm not using cannabis regularly every day. My tolerance is really low, but I
Mhm.
have friends who use. This one friend, he takes one, two, three 75 milligram edibles of THC a day. Three, that's 225 milligrams of THC a day.
That's a
Okay.
lot. Yeah.
So functioning. He is so high functioning. He is such a powerful guy. It's amazing. Okay. Never a thought missed. Never, he doesn't miss anything. He's incredible and he's completely focused. So that's your tolerance, right? And people who have chronic pain really benefit from having a high tolerance because they can take a lot of THC therapeutically and not have that much psychoactivity, which is so
Mhm.
interesting. It's like here's what I love about cannabis. Okay, can I tell you one great thing about this plant
Sure.
medicine?
Yeah. Of course.
So the body has a limited number of receptors that it can open or release. Okay, which is so interesting. Um, the more you build a tolerance, the fewer of those available receptors there are, which is why my friend can take 225 milligrams a day because he only has a few receptors that are available. But if he had a chronic pain condition, he would be able to dose that condition with a mega amount of THC, 225 milligrams, that can really alleviate the pain. So that's a super interesting
Mhm.
you know, relationship. And most medicines don't work like that.
Yeah.
You overdose on if you take too much of most medicines, they're going to shut down your heart or your brain and kill you.
Mhm.
Not
Oh
cannabis.
yeah. So, so one question I had for you, well, a couple more questions. One is I've heard some cases where people claim that cannabis use can maybe bring on some sort of mental, disorders like maybe like bipolar or schizophrenia or stuff like that, like mental, health issues and people who are predisposed to it. Is there any truth to those claims? Is that something that you've seen in your research?
There is. If you do have psychiatric issues,
Personally, no. Well, my
no,
wife thinks I might.
I'm not asking you. No,
My wife might beg to differ, but
yeah, most of our friends know otherwise. But no, if one has psychiatric issues, one should be very mindful of anything they put in their body. As far as I'm concerned, that includes cannabis, alcohol, and certainly psychedelics. Right? I mean, I have
Mhm,
seen. Yeah, I've had friends. I've not friends. I know of stories of people who had very bad, almost like ego destroying experiences on cannabis, as well as psychedelics and as well as alcohol. I can't say that cannabis is unusual in that way. I think if you are on shaky mental ground or emotional ground, you should be very careful of what you put in your body. And I would not advise anybody listening to anything we're talking about if you have those issues. Yeah,
mhm.
absolutely. Yeah.
And with the current state of the industry, where yields are important, and and there's the black market too, which is kind of running amok right now because, especially in Canada, because they just totally screwed up the whole distribution. They made it legal so the consumer's not afraid to have it, but then the supply chain is just totally like non-existent and way
I
too
can't
expensive.
understand that. I don't know. I just don't understand that. But
And so now everyone's growing weed and selling it, but there's no real restrictions on how they grow it, what pesticides they use, what's going in the water, what kind of additives they're adding. I've heard stories of people spraying like these kind of like plasticky crystals on top to look more like give it more weight. So what's your thought on that in a non-regulated or lightly regulated industry, or even like you know, I don't know much about the medical industry, but the pesticides that are used on these plants that are smoked, has there been any testing on that? Like, is there any negative effects on, we're consuming this, we're smoking this, and it's industry is always trying to increase yields with the least amount of restrictions or friction to profit, which means like, yeah, whatever's the best chemical, let's use that. Like, so what's your thoughts on that as far as how we're consuming it, and the negative consequences of pesticides and all these kind of things.
well, obviously nobody wants pesticides, and obviously anybody who's putting toxic pesticides on cannabis that should be illegal. Okay,
Hmm.
they should be put in jail, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think the whole industry is only concerned with yields. I think a lot of the larger companies, particularly in Canada, are pretty mindful of what they're putting into the soil and on the plant. All right. And a lot of these, I mean, have you ever been inside of a cannabis grow? A big,
Yeah, I've been to a few of them. Yeah.
they're pretty amazing because they are super monitored, in terms of humidity, in terms of mold. I mean, you have to wear booties when you go in to avoid contamination. So
Hmm.
I think a lot of them are pretty mindful of that. And there's so many areas, with any plant, there's so many areas where things can grow wrong, from the growing, from the fertilization to even the curing, right? If cannabis isn't well cured, it's not very pleasant. It's not very
Yeah,
nice, right?
moldy.
So I think one of the great things about legalization is that it does ensure testing. And most states in the United States, I assume in Canada as well, um, test for cannabinoid content, so what you're buying. You can see maybe some terpene content also, so you can understand how the effects are going to change. Terpenes are super important. Happy to talk about that if you want. And then microbial testing. Any mold, any mildew, any heavy metals, and if there is, those things are taken right off the shelf immediately, at least in most United
Mhm.
States. And that's how it should be. So that's one of the great benefits of legalization is quality control. We need quality control. Yes, because there are people in the black market who, it may be pernicious, or they may just not know what they're doing. There's no,
Mhm.
who's teaching them?
Yeah.
YouTube, a lot of
Right.
times, not always, but often. But I have to say, like, my friends who grow and the people I know who are independent growers, maybe in California or Colorado, are the most, oh, they're incredible. They are so mindful of every single thing that's happening in those plants. So they talk to them every day. They touch them. They, they are their babies. And
Hmm.
people, what I think is true about cannabis and so psilocybin as well, is that people have a relationship with these plants. And
Hmm.
I think I think one of the reasons they've survived so well is that they form a relation in kind with human beings. And I know that sounds a little crazy, but I do believe that there is a mutual benefit from us knowing each other. How about that?
Hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. Couple more questions. So as we're sort of learning about how to evolve the way we grow things, we're seeing higher and higher THC percentages in a single plant. Like, do you think that's a natural thing? Do you think, many years ago, they grow naturally under the sun, there's a certain THC, and now we're just like, hey, let's breed these plants together. Let's splice this into that. Let's mix these two. And you're getting these crazy, like, I would assume unnatural combinations that, may be too intense for the average user. What's your take on that, or what you've seen? And is there
Well,
any ill consequences to that?
the interesting thing is that the higher THC yields are really the result of prohibition. I mean, it makes sense to grow stronger plants so that you can grow fewer plants and have a smaller quantity with a higher THC level, right? It's like moonshine. Okay,
Hmm.
if you want to use that old analogy, right? That's how that all began. That's how the growing
Evolved.
and the hybridization began. And clearly, there are some people who really like a lot of THC. There's now varieties with over 30% THC, which is really high, right?
Hmm.
A
Hmm.
high quantity of THC used to be considered 20, right? Now it's up to 30, and it could probably still keep growing. For me personally, I like a balance of THC and CBD. That was another result of prohibition. Because CBD mitigates the psychoactivity of THC, they fight each other, right?
Hmm.
I think they work great together. They work really well together because I don't want to, at this point in my life, um, I don't need to smash my brain most times. Some days I really do need to smash my brain. Okay,
Right.
I
We
really do.
all, I think we
And
all
that,
need
and
that
there's a
once in a
real
while.
benefit to that. I'm absolutely not opposed to that. Okay, but I do want to change my mind, and I do want to change my consciousness in a semi-regular way. I just don't want to obliterate it.
Hmm.
Okay, so I like a milder variety at this point, and I'm sure a lot of people my age. I mean, there's this whole new category of consumer called the Chardonnay mom. Middle-aged women basically who've like raised their kids, and they like a glass of wine, and they probably like a joint or an edible also, and they're going to be a growing class of consumer in cannabis. Um, but I think there's a lot of us who don't necessarily need the strongest. Now, is there a danger to it? The answer is we don't really know. It doesn't. I mean, on the face of it, it doesn't seem like there is. Again, we're not seeing massive outbreaks of insanity. Um, I'm more worried about massive outbreaks of guns in the United States, frankly, but
Hmm.
that's a whole nother political story that we can talk about if you want. But um, it doesn't seem to be. However, we just don't know. Like some people think there's a theory that if you overstimulate the endocannabinoid system, it's going to start under expressing receptors. It's going to do other things to make up for it. It's pretty unclear at this point. Probably, I mean, do you know people who are using tremendous amounts of cannabis every day?
I could probably list a few of them. Yeah.
So do I. And are there any qualities that they all tend to share?
Um, yes and no. Yeah, I'd say there's a few for sure.
What are those qualities?
I'd say less motivated maybe might seem like a good word, like a little more sluggish and
Oh yeah.
or maybe more chilled. Um, but that could be a stereotype that I'm sort of associating with comes to mind. Um,
I think it might be.
yeah, but there's not too many that are still that I'm close with that are overusing. And when I say overusing, I'm talking about like smoking all day long, like
Yeah, major,
just
major, major. I mean, the only thing I've ever
and
noticed is that
and
people smoke
and I
more. Go on, please.
And I think that without the cannabis, they'd probably still have a similar personality type. It's just they're not doing anything anyway, so now they're smoking cannabis. So I don't know if that's the cause or if that was really where
And
they were
and we
at.
and we don't know. We
Yeah.
don't know causation, right? It could be that people who are unfocused like cannabis rather than cannabis makes you unfocused,
Right, right.
right?
So that
One thing I noticed though is that people who use a lot of cannabis are notoriously not punctual.
yeah.
I can't tell you how many minutes I spent waiting for interview subjects to show up when I first started writing my book. But again, I don't know if it's causal or not. I'm a very
Right.
punctual person. I like to start on time and end on time. So who knows?
Right, right.
Mhm.
Okay, so now we go back to terpenes question. So you said you wanted to mention a bit about that. So tell me a bit about terpenes, what they are, why they're important, what the benefits are. I know this is a question that people ask a
Oh
lot,
yeah. Yeah.
or hearing about more and more. So tell me what you've learned about terpenes and what you think is most important about them for people to understand.
So I think so first of all, terpenes are smell molecules. So they make things smell. And I think they've identified 58 terps in cannabis, but the big ones are linalool, which is lavender, beta caryophyllene, which is sort of the back note of pepper or clove, pinene, which is pine, myrcene, which you smell in, I always forget what they compare it to. It could be like blueberry, maybe. Um, neroli or something like that, nerolium, which is a scent of orange, limonene, scent of lemon. And if you stop for a minute and think about certain names, lemon haze or blueberry kush, there's a reason that the growers have named them these things. They can perceive those smells. So current thinking on terps is that they direct the high. Like, you need the THC to get you high, but in combination, and this is important, in combination with THC, terpenes can direct it in one way. So limonene and pinene, lemon and pine, activating, much more common in a quote sativa variety that sort of stimulates the mind, right? Myrcene or beta caryophyllene, which are that back note of clove or blueberry, tend to be more sedating. So they're more common in indica varieties. So if you more physical, a more physical high, right? So
Hmm.
people, that expression couch lock. If you're locked on a couch, okay, I'm so thirsty, but God, it's like 5 feet to get the water. I'm never going to get it. That sort of feeling is probably from those terps. They keep you in your seat more. So that's what's quite interesting as growers continue to grow, they can it's hard to direct the growth of terpenes, certainly, but when smart growers know how to maximize certain varieties to bring up those qualities. And I think
Hmm.
that's a really interesting maze to puzzle, and also helps me buy when I'm looking to buy. So they always say the nose knows, right? So you
Hmm.
always need to inhale. It's difficult in times of COVID, but when you smell a variety, you know if that's the one you want to smoke right now.
Hmm.
Generally know that, okay? And I tend to know from myself, I like a sativa. I prefer a sativa variety, and I like that smell of pine and lemony stuff. Like among my favorite strains is one that a grower in California grows. It's called In the Pines, and it is literally, it just makes my lungs expand. And the other one is Super Lemon Haze, which is a very activating sativa. So those are
Hmm.
to my personal preferences. But that's the story on terpenes, and it's a really interesting study. And we have so much more to learn.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, awesome. I love that explanation. I think, it's interesting that the different energies associated with the different smells could bring a different experience on. So that
Well,
totally
it's
makes
like
sense to me.
it's like aromatherapy, right? I mean, if you run a flotation tank, and if you go into your tank with a lavender pillow somehow on your head, you will lavender is relaxing.
Hmm.
It is, right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely in effect. It's definitely there, even on that simple level. But boy, add some THC to it, and boom.
Yeah. Yeah. I got a couple more for you. So, you mentioned earlier that the CBD sort of offsets the THC. So just a question. if you're having an intense trip or a difficult trip, or you want to change the experience, would taking straight CBD help in any way, shape, or form?
Definitely. We call it the life raft. Yeah. Especially for new users. Yeah. You always have a bottle of CBD on hand. Always.
Okay.
If I ran a dispensary, I would always make sure that if a new user came in, they got either a free or a discounted bottle of CBD drops, because it absolutely can can reduce some of the psychoactivity.
And so, like, what would a starting dose on CBD?
Ah, 'tis the question. I mean, that is really the big question. It's usually between 15 and 25 milligrams.
Okay, cool.
Okay. That's what people think. But, some people have efficacy with CBD at just 2 or 3 milligrams.
And can you feel any ill effects by taking too much CBD? Is there any sort of side effects or anxiousness or anything that you would?
It's mostly tiredness or drowsiness. At high doses, some people report a state of wakefulness. I am pretty agnostic to CBD. It doesn't really make me feel anything, I have to say. I'm not aware of it anyway.
Okay,
I use it for inflammation. Like,
okay.
I'm getting my second vaccine shot tomorrow, so I've been using aspirin or Tylenol and CBD in advance to lower the inflammation that I know is going to kill me, hit me tomorrow. Not going to kill me certainly, but make me uncomfortable,
Well,
right?
good luck with that and stocking up on the CBD. And
Oh
it
yes,
seems you're
very good.
well prepared.
I'm well prepared.
um, so one question I had for you is I don't even know if this is a thing. I think it is synthetic THC. Is there such a thing that exists where it's
Oh,
created?
oh yeah, it's
Yeah,
called
and
THQ and all. They're not. It's not synthetic THC. It's synthetic cannabinoids. Basically, it's that shit that's sold in gas stations called K. Is it legal in Canada?
I've never bought it, but I've heard about it, and I don't know if it's a real thing, or like even medical grade like pills of THC, are those synthetic or are those created?
Well, you're talking about Marinol or
I don't know the specific.
Dronabinol is what they're called, the medical terms. Yeah. So what happened is, in the 1980s, U.S. government thought, okay, we can create a synthetic THC and give it to people, and that way we're going to get rid of the legal market. Okay, another brilliant thought. And they made it a Schedule 5 drug, which means it's available by prescription. So what happened is they started giving it to AIDS patients in the 1980s, because AIDS patients loved cannabis. It helped them with pain, it helped them with nausea, helped them with so many illnesses that were basically killing them. But nobody in the hospitals liked the Marinol. They made them dysphoric, is the word, anti euphoria, and it is what spurned the idea of this, what's known as the entourage effect. And in cannabis, the idea is that all compounds in cannabis work best and most harmoniously together. If you try to pull out these separate elements like THC alone, you're going to cause a distorted effect. The plant itself is naturally balanced, which is sort of beautiful, right? And it's like,
And they say that about most plant medicines as well. There's other things in there that are there specifically to help counteract different things or protect against this. And
yeah.
yeah, so I've heard that.
So the impulse, given we live in a pretty pharmaceutically driven cultures, the two of us, is to isolate the chemicals, the compounds, and make them stronger and more targeted in action. That has been very difficult with cannabis, as we just talked about with Marinol. It hasn't really worked, but there's lots of life sciences, biopharma companies in both of our countries that are exploring synthesizing cannabinoids from things like yeast and other compounds, to create specific targeted actions.
Interesting.
I say, listen, if you can get something that puts me to sleep and lets me wake up happily every day, or you can get something that relieves my pain or takes away my stress, and it's targeted and it's not going to cause any ill effects, bring it on. But I think
Mhm.
it's going to be, I mean, most of the scientists I know say it's definitely doable, definitely doable. It's going to happen in 2 or 3 years. I don't think it's that easy.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
see no evidence yet, but they're smarter than me, and they will probably prove me wrong at some point.
Mhm. Interesting. Okay, and one more, I guess, closing question or idea we can jam on here is your idea of the dispensary being this place that needs to sort of evolve or fill a gap in the current sort of cannabis industry. So tell me a bit about your vision or your idea, or what that means exactly, and what that looks like.
So this is a vision because it doesn't exist yet, but I'm working on something that I'll tell you about it later. But so I think because I think of cannabis as a gateway to wellness, right? I think it can also be mixed. I know for sure it can be mixed with other natural supplements, ashwagandha, uh, um, melatonin, many of them. I've worked with different formularians by chemists who put these things together, which is not the easiest thing to do, by the way. But once you get the formulas right, I've had some amazing experiences. So I think that why is the dispensary only, I know why they're only selling cannabis because the margins are really good, but I think they should also be selling supplements that amplify the effects of these meds, and then that can really take the whole thing into a wellness perspective, health and wellness, right? They're all plant medicines, they all come from nature. People understand that. In most cases, they're not going to harm you, taken intelligently, right? And you can mix and match these things. And God, wouldn't it be great to go into a dispensary and I want some cannabis, or I want some edible, and I also want this ashwagandha because I know it's going to have this effect. Or wouldn't it be great to have a dispensary, a bud tender, be able to say, oh, you want to use that for sleep? Try it with blah, blah, blah,
Hmm.
because we hear or we know ultimately that that's how it's going to work best. So I think dispensaries are sitting on an untapped market, and I don't think many of them are going to do this, but I think the smartest, of course, that's my idea. I think the smartest dispensary is going to understand this and start putting the pieces together,
Hmm.
start putting the wellness pieces together. And I have this other company called Medical Cannabis Mentor, which is an education company. So we educate healthcare professionals, nurses, doctors, pharmacists. We educate bud tenders, and soon we're going to educate patients. But we're building an app that includes all of this information in the app. So the practitioner has dosing recommendations, but the patient gets dosing recommendations and ideas on how to combine supplements with cannabis and in what doses and how to start and how to adjust those doses. So
Hmm.
that's let's call it my big vision. I'm currently working on the technology now. If anybody wants to invest, they can call us. I'm only kidding about that. We actually don't. We're actually looking to put the pieces together now and pilot with a healthcare organization or dispensary that wants to, put the pieces together and see how this can all work, and then collect real world evidence, right? Not just anecdotal evidence, but
Which is important. Which is
it's
important. A lot of the
crucial. I mean, that's how
mainstream want to see that kind of things. Like, what's the actual evidence?
I want to see it.
Yeah.
I want to know. I've believe me, I've heard from enough people. Oh, do this and do that, and this will happen. And well, maybe not. Right?
Hmm.
I want to know that 10,000 people did this, and 90% of them had this effect, and 10% had that effect. And I want to know that so I can make my own informed decisions. So
Hmm.
I think it's. I guess I also think it puts the power back in the patient's hands, because sometimes the allopathic route can be pretty disempowering. Just like, do everything I say and don't question it, and I'm not going to tell you anything, right? It's hard. I mean, doctors are limited on time, medicines are complicated, side effects are confusing, blah 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 blah. But I do think that, especially in the wellness sphere, where you're taking things, preventatively, or to make you feel better, or stop other things from happening, those people are quite educated and want to know, and are eager to know what works together, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, you,
Absolutely.
you have experience with plant medicines. Doesn't that sound like, I don't know, sort of an appealing thing to get out of your cannabis also?
Yeah. Why not? Yeah. Absolutely.
Why not? Right?
Yeah, no, amazing. Okay, so Joe, just to wrap up here, I always like to ask this question: is there any question I haven't asked you that you wish that I did ask you about, or something you want to share that we haven't covered?
You already asked me who am I, which that pretty much I'm still trying to figure out the
We
answer.
always start with the most existential
I mean, that
questions.
is just such a hard question. So I'm going to just spend the rest of my life thinking about that question, Gio. And any question, feel free to call and ask. Okay.
All right. All right. Sounds good. Well, where can people get a hold of you? You know, you have a few projects going on. Tell us about the projects you got, if there's any,
Yeah,
social media, websites, anything like that.
happy to. So the podcast I run is called Brave New Weed. We call it High Minded Conversations for the Post Prohibition Era. I'm trying to talk to people who are really trying to change the game and think about the plant and the science and the law and the politics and the fun aspects in that. And we're also now starting to expand a little, talk about psychedelics too, because they, why not? Because they're all interesting, really.
Hmm.
So that's bravenewweed.com. The education platform is called medicalcannabismentor.com, and it's all of those words put together, point.com, medical cannabis mentor. And I'm very reachable. I'm Joe at joedolce.com. I mean, if you email me, I will probably at some point return your email.
Awesome.
As long as you don't abuse me, or if you abuse me in interesting ways, I'll probably respond. But if you abuse me in boring ways, I probably won't.
No response. Okay. So,
Respond.
so guys, check out Joe's book, Brave New Weed. Check his podcast out, the websites he just mentioned. Um, and do some more research. If you're new to cannabis, Joe's got a lot of resources for you. You guys all know that I'm a huge advocate of plant medicines and natural experimentation and the freedom to sort of choose what you put into your body and where you explore with your mind and the expansion of consciousness. But always you want to be safe. And if you have any sort of questions or mental issues or health concerns, always speak to a professional or a doctor before experimenting. So I just want to leave with that note. And thank you, saying a big thank you to Joe for coming, sharing some of his knowledge, and for a quite interesting conversation.
Thank you, Gio. Thanks for asking so many interesting questions.
Yeah, that's my job here.
The
So
same.
until next time, guys, thanks for all the follows, shares, likes, and comments. I appreciate all of you guys so much, and we'll see you guys soon. Peace.